We're at our fifth C, cultivate. This is one of my favorites because what you're doing is you're cultivating the conversation of your relationship. You're cultivating it moving forward. These are principles that will last you a lifetime. So if you're watching this video, I would highly encourage you to take this segment. You're going to have all these other conversations. They're going to continue to come about as you're married. But this segment right here on cultivate is going to be one of the most powerful and one of the most important, because it's going to be all about how you communicate. And I'm telling you, what's fascinating about this is one of the largest predictors of divorce, I've said this before, is emotional disconnection. In other words, this is why I genuinely believe that it's not communication that's the issue. I don't care about communication necessarily. What I care about is, are you fighting for your spouse's heart? And you've heard me say that over and over and over again. Are you fighting for your fiance's heart? Do you genuinely believe that your fiance is fighting for your heart? Okay? This session is going to be very powerful because what we're going to learn is what makes marriage work. We're going to learn from researchers what are the key factors. John Gottman, for example, one of the top marital researchers in the world, found that your ability to accept influence from your spouse is one of the highest predictors of marital satisfaction. Your ability to accept influence from your spouse. Dr. David Burns found that the single greatest predictor of healthy communication and healthy marital satisfaction was your ability to take responsibility for your role in conflict, in how you handle conflict, how you handle a relational dispute. And then Dr. Carol Rusbelt, I love this one. She found that pro-relationship thoughts are incredibly powerful. So in other words, it's an us against the world attitude. When we step into our marriage, what we're doing is we're looking at our opponents. You have to name your opponent, okay? It all starts by naming your opponents. And you've heard me talk about many opponents in our marriage, from our children, early on as infants, to just even communication about in-laws and holidays and those types of things. We all have opponents in our marriage. But until you name your opponent, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up fighting with each other, not for one another. You'll see your spouse as the opponent. You'll see your spouse as the enemy. That's what you don't want to do. Instead, you want to see your spouse, you want to see your fiance as your greatest teammate. Your greatest teammate. And you're putting a game plan together. That's what this whole course is about. What's the game plan that we're putting together to make sure that we're tackling and beating our opponents? And what ends up happening is if we don't name those opponents, they can become elephants in our marriage. And those elephants will rear their ugly heads. They'll come waddling into your living room every now and again when the issue comes up. And if you don't deal with it, if you don't name it, what'll happen is it'll eat off of the moment, it'll waddle on out, and it'll come back another time. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger until there's a massive blow up, which is why the more you can talk about your opponents and name your opponents, the less elephants are in your mouth. The elephants belong at the zoo, y'all. Okay, so keep that in mind. Keep the elephants at the zoo. Don't bring them into your marriage. You want to make sure that you name them. And that's what this whole course is about. You're naming all of these opponents, these potential opponents of emotional intimacy in your marriage. Okay? So what we're focusing on then in your marriage is that what's going on within your fiance's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. This is less about communication, and it's more about fighting for your spouse's heart. That's what this is about. Remember, I'm going to repeat those 3 findings of high marital satisfaction and what makes marriages work. Gottman found it's your ability to accept influence from your spouse. Dr. David Burns found that it's your ability to take sole responsibility for your role in conflict in the relationship. And number 3, Dr. Carol Rusbelt found that it is your ability to have pro-relationship thoughts. Us against the world attitude. We are a team. We are fighting for one another, and I am for my spouse. I have pro-relationship thoughts. So in other words, when we have conflict, it might be that I spoke that way to you because I miss you and I love you and I really want to be spending more time with you. And I didn't know you were getting ready to go spend more time with your friends. I didn't know that. And so I'm sorry I lashed out at you and got angry when I heard you were going to have a girls' night or a boys' night because I really miss you and I want to spend time with you. I value us. I value our relationship. And so you're leading with a pro-relationship thought. That's the power of this. And so as you have these conversations, have all of these conversations around the context of how are we fighting for one another? How are we developing this us against the world attitude? I know often I will hear from couples that aren't doing well, people who are married, who aren't doing well. And one of the things that they'll say is, how do I change my spouse, right? They're not saying that, but they're saying it without saying it. So in other words, there's a lot of, he's doing this or she's doing that. And I don't know how to handle it when he's doing this or she says this. And so I usually walk a couple through three primary wills or their willingness in this relationship. And that's what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with three willing, are you willing, okay? And I want to start with number one, because if you can get past these wills here, you can apply skills that will lead you deeper into marital intimacy day in and day out, bar none, okay? So I want to walk you through these real quickly. Number one is you have to pay the price of intimacy. Dr. David Burns has a great definition of intimacy. He says that intimacy is your willingness to endure the negative emotions you get when you get close to another person. Your willingness to endure the negative emotions you feel when you get close to another person. Are you willing to endure those negative emotions? Are you willing to endure the bad breath the next morning? Are you willing to endure whenever there's toothpaste all over the sink because your spouse made a mess and didn't clean it up? Are you willing to endure that he or she is sticking up for her parents over you? Are you willing to endure these conversations and figure it out when it doesn't feel good? Are you willing to endure that? If you are, then it goes to number two. Are you willing? This is David Burns' research, right? It goes back to high marital satisfaction. Are you willing to choose to change the only person you can, which is yourself? Remember, there's three. I want you to understand something. There are three choices you can make here in any type of conflict. Number one is you can choose to leave the relationship because that's a reality. That's something you can choose to do. You can also choose to maintain the status quo. You can choose to maintain the way the relationship is going right now and keep trying to change your spouse, or you can choose to change the only person you can, and that's yourself. The third will is giving up blame or giving up the right to be right when you feel like you've been wronged in a situation, right? You got to be willing to give up blame. If you're blaming the other person, it isn't going to go anywhere. Any skill that you learn about how to communicate isn't going to work because you're blaming the other person. You're not willing to take on the responsibility for your role in the conflict. And here's the reality. You might have been wronged. You may be the one who was wronged, but your role in how you communicate about that is still something you have to look inward on, because as Dr. Burns found, it's our ability to accept our sole responsibility to our role in that conflict. So as we look at this, you are a team. You're fighting for one another. You're not fighting with one another. You're looking at pro-relationship thoughts, us against the world, and you're willing to endure the negative emotions you get when you get close to another person. You're willing to choose to change the only person you can, which is yourself. You have 100% responsibility to change your role and how you deal with a conflict. And then number three is you are willing to give up blame or your right to be right when you feel like you've been wronged. This is going to release you to be able to step into having incredible conversation, incredible conflict resolution if you're able to get past those three wills. A lot of times I'll be counseling premarital couple or I'll be coaching families and I'll look at them and I'll say, listen, we are stuck because of one of these three wills. We're stuck because there's an unwillingness to move forward in one of these three ways. And so I just really want to encourage you to look at one of those three ways as you name your opponents, get in the same locker room, if you will, to be teammates with your spouse, and put a game plan together for emotional intimacy. Because remember this, It is what matters the most is what's going on within your spouse's heart. What's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. That is how you cultivate a healthy environment in your relationship. It's how you cultivate healthy conversation is by choosing an us against the world attitude.